This recipe for sheet pan pizza is one of the best methods for making amazing pizza at home. It requires no special equipment, and with a few simple tips, it will taste just like your favorite pizzeria. Let's begin by adding 2 teaspoons of instant dry yeast to 1 3/4 cup of warm water that's about 105 degrees. Let that sit for 5 minutes or until it becomes bubbly at the top, which means the yeast is alive. In a large bowl, pour in the yeast mixture along with 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Next, we're going to add the flour a little bit at a time. I'm using 4 cups of bread flour, which will help make a fluffy and chewy crust that's ideal for a sheet pan pizza. Add in about a cup or so at a time, stirring with your fork to combine the ingredients. Once half of the flour has been added, toss in 2 teaspoons of salt and 1 teaspoon of sugar, which when you don't have the benefit of a real pizza oven, can help add additional flavor and char to the dough. Dump in most of the remaining flour, but leave back a little more than half a cup, which we'll use during the kneading process. Once it starts to look like a proper dough, dump it onto a floured workstation. Make sure it's well covered in flour and start kneading it, which basically entails folding it onto itself and pushing down with the heel of your palm while you're turning the dough, trying to keep a rough circular shape. When it starts to get sticky again, just sprinkle on more of the reserved flour. But by the end, the dough should become very smooth and stretchy. You can do this in a stand mixer, but that takes away half the fun and your forearm workout. We'll knead the dough for about 8 to 10 minutes, or until you can pull the dough and it stretches fairly far without tearing. Once the dough is ready, form it into an oval-like shape and grease a square baking dish with about a tablespoon of olive oil. As it rises, this will help shape the dough into a square, which is what we need for the final result. Flip to coat in the oil and let it rest for 1 hour covered with a kitchen towel. After the hour mark, it should have about doubled in size. Grease your hands in olive oil and fold the dough onto itself 4 times or once from each side. This will provide more structure and air bubbles to the dough, making it light and airy. Cover and let it rest for another hour. In the meantime, we'll make the sauce, starting with 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 cloves of smashed garlic, and a pinch of red pepper flakes. Sauté that on a medium-low heat for a couple minutes or until the garlic is golden. Then pour in a large can of your favorite crushed tomatoes. Add and stir about a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a pinch of black pepper, before tossing in a stem of basil, and then just let it simmer, stirring occasionally on low heat until it reduces by half. After the second rise, grease your large baking sheet with about 2 teaspoons of olive oil before plopping the dough in the center of the pan. Flip it over to coat in the oil, and then gently start pushing it with your fingertips to the edges of the pan. But don't worry about getting it all the way to the end, because we're going to let it rise once more for about 30 to 45 minutes. At this point, your sauce should be done, so remove it from the heat to let it cool completely before adding it to the pizza. This is also a good time to preheat your oven to 500 degrees. After the third rise, the dough should pretty much fill out the entire pan, but you can push it out to close any gaps and form the crust. Begin spooning over an even layer of sauce. I used about 3/4 cup, which would be more than you would need for a typical thin crust pizza, but since this is a thicker crust, a little extra sauce won't hurt. Then sprinkle on about 7 ounces of shredded, low moisture mozzarella. With the cheese, less is more, so you still want some spots of sauce showing. Now, of course, you can put whatever toppings you prefer, but one of my favorite combinations is sausage, peppers, and onion. So I started with about 1/3 of a thinly sliced red onion, then about half of a sliced red pepper, both of which have been lightly coated in olive oil so they don't burn in the oven. Then evenly dot on about 8 ounces of raw Italian sausage over the top, which will cook and render while in the oven, adding more flavor to the pizza. Finish with a couple of generous handfuls of freshly and finely grated Parmesan cheese. Place the pan in the bottom third of your preheated oven and cook for about 18 minutes. Baking at a high temperature like 500 degrees is your best chance of getting a pizzeria-like char. But if you don't like your pizza as well done, then you can cook at 475 for about 20 minutes. But either way, give it a look at about the 15-minute mark to make sure it's cooking evenly. Once it's cooked to your liking, remove it from the pan and let it cool on a rack so the bottom stays crispy. Finish with another sprinkle of Parmesan cheese and some fresh basil leaves for garnish. This one is probably easiest to cut with a pair of kitchen shears, unless you have a cutting board bigger than the pie. You can find the full recipe in the description below. As you can see, it's extremely crispy on the bottom, has a nice char from the hot oven, and is full of flavor from the sauce and toppings. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments or if you plan on trying this one out. Thank you for watching.